even in ancient times, the cultural life of other nations far beyond the boundaries of India. Greater India, Tibet, China, Japan, and Korea. And in the south, in Ceylon, the Malay Peninsula, and far away in the islands of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. In the west, the tracks of Indian thought may be traced far into Central Asia, where buried in the sands of the desert were found Indian texts. For the historians who pursue the history of human thought, the Upanishads have yet far greater significance. From the mystical doctrines of the Upanishads, one current of thought may be traced to the mysticism of Persian Sufism, to the mystic Logos doctrine of the Neoplatonic. Campbell observed that the most illuminating summary prospect of the paths, bypaths, and transformations through which a body of Oriental law might pass from Sanskrit into Latin and thence into European life is provided by an Indian book of fables, the Panchatantra. Translated about 550 AD into Persian for the Sasanian king Khosru Anushirvan, 531 to 579, it was adapted into Arabic about 760 with a new title, Kalila and Dimna, the Fables of Pilpay. And this, then, was translated into Syriac circa 1000, Greek circa 1080, Hebrew circa 1250, and Old Spanish 1251. About 1270 into Latin, and this process continues. In all of Europe and Asia, there were then but 4 essential languages of learning, science, and religion. In the Levant, Arabic, Latin in Europe, Sanskrit in the Indian sphere, and Chinese in the Far East. And as Arabic was the dominant of the 2 tongues of the West, so was Sanskrit in the Orient. From the yak trails of Tibet to the village markets of Bali, its syllables rose everywhere on the pluming smoke of incense to that void beyond non-being that is the destination ultimately of all Oriental prayer. The Divine Comedy, wrote Dante scholar Marie-Louise Egerton Castle in the early 20th century, is so exact a chronicle of his later doings that it has been possible from references in the work to trace his wanderings and know for certain what roads were trodden by his exiled feet. This precious manuscript, his magnum opus, was his only confidant. It is very much more than an account of his vision of hell, purgatory, and paradise. It is almost a diary. He drew his similes from what he saw as he journeyed along the lonely, perilous ways. The memories of green hills and running streams that haunt the thirsty souls in hell are Dante's memories of his own travels. In his Orientalism, Western conception of the Orient, Edward W. Said demonstrates that Western representation began in classical Greece. Representations building on the earlier ones, however inordinately careful their schematization, however dramatically effective their placing in Western imaginative geography, can be illustrated if we turn now to Dante's Inferno. What Dante tried to do in the Inferno is, at one and the same time, to characterize the Orient as alien and to incorporate it schematically on a theatrical state whose audience, manager, and actors are for Europe and only Europe. Dante's achievement in the Divine Comedy was to have seamlessly combined the realistic portrayal of mundane reality with a universal and eternal system of Christian values. What Dante the pilgrim sees as he walks through the Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso is a unique judgment. For instance, Boniface III is seen as eternally confined to hell for his sins, Yet they are seen as enacting, indeed living, the very characters and actions that put them where they will be for eternity. Thus, each of the figures in Dante's vision not only represents himself, but is also a typical representation of his character and the fate meted out to him. The discriminations and refinements of Dante's poetic grasp of Islam are an instance of the schematic, almost cosmological inevitability with which Islam and its designated representatives are creatures of Western geographical, historical, and above all, moral apprehension. Muhammad, Saladin, Averroes are fixed in a visionary cosmology, fixed, laid out, boxed in, imprisoned, without much regard for anything except their function and the patterns they realize on the stage on which they appear. Empirical data about the Orient or about any of its parts count for very little. What matters and is decisive is the Orientalist vision, by no means confined to the professional scholar, but rather the common possession of all who have thought about the Orient in the West. Dante's powers as a poet intensify, make more rather than less representative these perspectives on the Orient. For Dante, the most crucial phase of the transit, that is, the between, from adolescent obedience to the prudence, generosity, and affability of age, is the middle period of the midspan of 20 years of matured man. On this aspect, Dante chose a paradigm in the history of Virgil's protagonist, Aeneas. For in his mid-career, Aeneas gave up his Asian phase of life to build European Rome, and to do that, as Dante writes, hardened himself to enter alone with the Sibyl into hell and search for the soul of his father, Anchises, in the face of so many perils. At his midlife, in 1300 AD, the adventure of the dark wood occurred to him, when he went through crucifixion, death, descent to hell, and passing through purgatory to paradise, and returned to the service of the world. For Dante, the art of passing away means preparation for death, and the comedy is a journal of his journey to purgatory, the between. So it needs many preparations, just as Buddhists are required to do.
Hope that forever springs in living stream. Lady, thou art so great, and hast such might, that whoso crave grace, nor to thee repair, their longing even without wings seeketh flight. Thy charity doth not only him upbear who prays, but in thy bounty's large excess. And its wish came revealed to it in that light. To the high imagination force now failed, but like to a wheel, whose circling nothing jars, already on my desire and will prevailed, the love that moves the sun and the other stars.